Welcome everyone. Today we'll have a Genshin Impact guide on the elemental counters just like Pokemon. As you can see in the background, I have made a picture for Klee versus the Cryo Abyssal Mage, and this is in the Pokemon format. I was trying to make all of those pictures for each of the characters for different monsters. But after going through a lot of the image files, I realized it's much easier if I just use my notepad. So we'll be coming back to the notepad, but firstly I want to show you guys what's available. So basically this is the picture we started with, Pikachu versus Slowpoke, which is a water Pokemon. Electric versus water, it's super effective. And similarly, if we have fire versus the Cryo Mage, it's also super effective. Coming over to our notes over here, you can see that this particular guide is tailored towards a Pokemon-like elemental counter. So what we'll focus on is what counters what, and after that we'll explain why those counters what at different percentage of damage, and we'll look at the damage types as we use different elemental interactions, and also look at into elemental shields and other elemental effects. And lastly, I'll talk about how Elemental Mastery can give us different damages at 300 Elemental Mastery, which is the optimal level. And finally, I'll give you guys a preview of the next video to come with a top meta damage build. To start off this guide, it is very important for us to understand there are 7 elements in Genshin Impact right now. It's likely to be 8 in the future, but right now there are only 7 elements in the game, and the most common ones we see are Cryo, Electric, Hydro, and Pyro. It's not very often that we see Geo and Animal, but we do see those, and Dendro monsters are usually the ones with a wooden shield. Now I'm sure most of you have seen this particular elemental interaction chart. If you haven't, I'll also post this one in the description and also on my Twitter for you guys. So this one summarizes what elements does what, but that's not all. We're here to see what elements counters what. So coming over to our notes, you can see that I have made it handy and summarized everything for us. So when we have Cryo monsters to face, we should aim for the Electro or Pyro characters that can counter them. I also made a small text on the side to tell you if it's super effective or if there's a special effect you should look for. For example, with Hydro monsters, if we freeze them with Cryo, it's very effective to control them for 6 seconds, but we also do extra damage with Pyro on top of that. You can see over here I'm using special words like super effective and effective. Effective means we're doing pretty decent bonus damage, and super effective means this is the best element to counter the enemy. As we move down from the list of elements, you can see that Cryo plus Electric will debuff enemy with minus defense, and similarly, as we go down further, we can see Dendro is countered by Pyro. Pyro can burn away the shield with an initial explosion and then burns the shield away. For Anemo characters, we can go with any of the 4 elements to trigger a throw effect for bonus damage. And finally, for Geo characters, right now they're quite neutral. It's like the Pokemon chat over here. I'll show you guys the Pokemon chat I was checking for reference. So this is the Pokemon chat I was trying to make, but I was unable to make something as great as that. So what we did was I just used a notepad. For Geo characters, I haven't found a really good counter for them. So if you guys do know, let me know what are the counters great for Geo. Now you may be wondering, what do I mean by Pokemon-like elemental counters? It's because there are 4 types of elemental interactions, and we're taking advantage of some of the increased damage elemental interactions with the enemy's element and also the characters we have with their element. For example, if we go into the first type of elemental damage type, we can see Vaporize and Melt are the increased percentage damage type. If the enemy is Pyro and we debuff them with Hydro, we're doing 200% additional damage onto them. And similarly, if the enemy is Hydro, we debuff them with Pyro, we're doing 150% additional damage. Now you do see the smaller number over here. This is because if the monster itself started with the element, they do have some resistance, so they take a little less damage compared to the monsters that was fully debuffed. If you haven't seen our previous video, we had a video with Mona doing over 500,000 damage. Yes, that's right, you heard me right. So if you come back to this previous video, I showed how it is possible for the Chinese player to hit with his Mona for about 500,000 damage with a critical hit. Similar to Vaporize, we can also have Melt with the Cryo and Pyro combo. So if we debuff enemy with Cryo first, then Pyro on top of that will be doing 200% additional damage as Pyro. And vice versa, if the Pyro damage is the first debuff, then followed by Cryo, we're doing 150% more damage. And this comes back to the elemental counters over here. So if the enemy is already Cryo, we should look for a Pyro character that can deal damage to them. Let me demonstrate this to you guys with a replay. So over here you can see my Klee is fighting some of the slimes. Those are level 71 slimes and my Klee is currently level 73. I do not have the best items on my Klee, but you do see a lot of high damage numbers being popped off simply because those are Cryo characters. Now let's have a good look of those fights over here. You can see each time the melt is triggered, my Klee is doing so much more damage because of the Pyro element being countering the Cryo element over here. So let's have a quick look. Let's see if I can catch a particular damage number for us. So over here, the charge attack, so we did about 10,000 charge attack damage, and this is just the interaction between Cryo and Pyro. And that is why Pyro characters are so strong against the Cryo enemies. Now if you haven't subscribed, this is a really good time to do so. Make sure you also turn the bell on for the latest news as I find more of them for us. You can see that we're really dedicated for Genshin Impact. We'll have builds, guides, tips, news and events updates for everything that's Genshin Impact related. Now there is also a hidden mechanics in the game that tells you what elements counters what. If you guys haven't noticed, let me show you over here. So if we come into the game, and what we do is we come to a dungeon, and what's going to happen is the dungeon is going to recommend you to have a certain element against the monsters. Over here we're looking at electric and pyro as recommended elements. Now they did not recommend those elements out of random, so that was a cryo dungeon. In order for the cryo dungeon to be countered by you, the recommended elemental characters are Electro and also Pyro. So if we come back over here, this is actually a cryo dungeon. So what that means is you can see over here massive cryo energy and the monsters are cryo. So the game is telling us to use elemental counters to deal the most damage. Now if you guys remember earlier, I spoke about 4 different types of elemental interactions. We'll have a brief summary on those, we won't go into too much detail. The next one is with extra damage type. We can deal Overload, Superconduct, Electrocharge, Shatter, and also all throw effects additional damage. We can come back to the elemental reaction chart over here to see how to produce those particular damage. Now keep in mind guys, those damage do not get a percentage multiplier like the Vaporize and like the Melt. And because Pyro is in both of those, this is why Pyro is such a strong DPS character when used in combination with other elements. Coming back over here, you can see that the additional damage type depends on the current character level. So in the video, if my Klee had higher character level than 71 up to level 80, I'll do more damage by percentage. I'll make a special guide on this. This is called the level suppression. The higher level you are, the more damage you do. The lower level you are, the more damage you take. And similarly for the monsters in comparison. The higher Elemental Mastery, the more damage we do. We'll come back over here after to see what does Elemental Mastery do for us at a certain level. And also finally, some of the artifact set can also give us bonus triggering effect or elemental combos. For example, the Vedasint, the best Anemo support character set, also gives 60% throw damage bonus. Next up, we'll have a quick look at Crystallize, which is when we interact with one of those 4 elements with Geo as the second element to be casted. Coming over to our notes for Crystallized Shield, you can see that the shield provides 200% additional protection towards that particular element. Let's say if I'm fighting a cryo monster, if I create a cryo shield by casting Geo onto the monster, what happens is my shield will be 250% more effective against those particular monsters. Now the shield strength that is casted also depends on the character's level, elemental mastery, the shield level or the passive of the skill, and lastly, there are artifacts like the Retracing Bullet, which give us 30% more shield strength. The final elemental effect that is available in the game are Burning and Freezing. With Dendro plus Pyro, we can start an initial physical damage that explodes, then deal continuous Pyro damage. Similarly, with Cryo and Hydro, we can freeze enemy from 3 to 6 seconds, and this allows for Shatter. When you deal physical damage when enemies are frozen, you can shatter them and deal additional damage. Now most of us know that Elemental Mastery is great for elemental combos like the Vaporize, like Melt. You can see that we have 63 Mastery on Venti over here, we have 12%, 28% and 19%. But why start to ask myself, is it always good to have high Elemental Mastery? Does it have a cap, or is it a linear progression with higher damage, the higher we get? So how is this calculated? So I looked everywhere across the forums, everywhere. Eventually I came to some Chinese calculation, which actually shows graphic designs of how damage are calculated. So basically to summarize this, if you want to read it yourself, I'll have the link for you guys as well. The progression or the damage increase with high Elemental Mastery actually goes down after 800 Elemental Mastery. I'll do a quick translation so you can actually see some of the words. So about 800 points of Elemental Mastery, it actually loses out, so it's like a diminishing return. You're getting less for higher Elemental Mastery. It's the opposite. I thought the higher you get, the more damage you do. But the higher we get, the less incremental damage we get out of it. So this comes to our next point. What can 300 Elemental Mastery give us? Basically, the article I was showing you shows that 300 Elemental Mastery is actually the best for value and the optimal for damage. The highest damage we can achieve with the Elemental Mastery. The more we get, the more higher, but the less incremental, more damage. So we get about 50% Vaporize and Melt damage. We get about 125% for all the other interactions. And lastly, if we are casting a shield, we get 75% more shield strength with the Elemental Mastery of 300. Now before we jump into the preview for the next guide, I really want to touch up on the elemental counters for different Abyss Mage. So over here I found an image on Reddit, and it actually shows the Hydro counters the Pile Elemental Mage, the Pile counters Cryo Elemental Mage, and lastly Cryo counters Hydro Abyssal Mage. So what that means is, very similar to our table of elemental counters, this also shows visually what you can do to break the shield. Because those mages are very powerful with the shield down, it's very important for us to come back to the elemental counters and pick the best combination of characters we can have against them. In one of the next guide I have prepared for you guys, we'll be looking at some of the top meta damage builds. This focuses on two different builds. One is with elemental bonus for Hydro, Pile, and Electro. Some of the 5-star characters people tend to use are Mona, Diluc, Klee, and Keqing, and some of the 4-stars are Xiaoling, Razor, and Bidu. Similarly, people also use the critical rate and critical damage build. One of the most popular character is Nongon, followed by that Noelle, Jing, and any of the DPS character can work. If you're not sure who are the DPS characters, I have a quick stream shot for you, so if you look behind me, you can see who are the DPS characters. And finally, for our next guide, we'll also touch up on how good Bennett is with his endgame support with 55% of his current attack for the entire team. Keep in mind guys, he is great for endgame because we have more resource. Currently we do not have enough resource to go into Bennett to make him super effective. To summarize this video, yes guys, they are super effective characters against certain elements. For example, as Pile and Klee were great against Pile Abyssal Mage. Similarly, we also have images which shows what elements also counters what elemental mage. In order to go deeper with the elemental counters, I went and researched all of the dungeons first to see what are the effective elements, and also what are the best combinations we can use against certain type of enemies. And lastly, knowing that 300 Elemental Mastery actually give us the best value for stats, we can look towards about 50%, 125%, and 75% bonus stats with that much Elemental Mastery. Now if you found this video helpful, make sure you subscribe and also turn the little bell on for the latest news. I'll be looking towards to make more builds, guides, tips, and news and event updates for us as we come further into the game. And as always, I wish you guys the best of luck with Catherine and have the most fun in exploring this wonderful world.